It is my pleasure to be joined once again by Konstantin Samoilov, as many of you know, one of the most respected voices on YouTube about what's happening inside Russia. Now he is perhaps also one of the most reviled people about what's happening inside Russia, well, at least according to Dugin. And we're, of course, going to get into that in the video and the conversation here. Before we do please check out Konstantin's channel if you are not already subscribed. If you can help out, because YouTube has still seen fit to demonetize his content, which is grossly unfair. So if you can see your way to subscribing and helping in any way, that would be tremendous. And of course, anyone who wants to help out on Silicon Curtain, we certainly won't say no. We're very grateful for your support. And of course, it helps to make the events that we're doing throughout the year happen. And we've got several more planned for the rest of the year. So thank you to everyone who has supported that. Konstantin, welcome back.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Fantastic to be back. I enjoy our conversations always. It's time for another one.
It's time for now. It's a time for our dose of truth and reality, I think, about what is going on. And of course, this huge. Well, we'll get to the sort of the bogus peace deal and the pressures on both sides, possibly to get something done. I say both sides, actually, three sides here, because you've got Ukraine, Europe on one corner, and then a pincer movement of, let's say, authoritarians on the other. That would be Trump and Putin. But let's talk about Dugin first. No, you forwarded this to me. I think it was yesterday. I have to admit, one, I was shocked, actually, but also I was concerned because Alexander Dugin, very toxic figure, but very aligned, very close with the Putin regime. So the fact that you are on his radar, I instantly felt that might be well, unnerving, disturbing for you to discover that.
Extremely disturbing. Alexander Dugin is the philosopher who is the creator of Russian world concept. And he is the one who has sold this concept to Vladimir Putin. And what Putin and Russia has been doing is based on this concept. And he is not just very close, he's on the very inside. He is the inside of the regime. He is, as from what I understand, Putin's friend. They talk frequently. I personally am very concerned about that.
If he's on, if you're on his radar, there are many people within the regime, including the toxic propagandists, who will be following Dugin, retweeting his stuff, looking to see where he is ideologically, looking to see where his ideas and opinions go. It helps form the whole ecosystem of propaganda. You're very much swimming against that tide. You are trying to describe a reality rather than this propagandistic shell that's being propagated. So, is this in any way going to intimidate you, or does it actually reinforce the view that what you're doing is even more important?
Now I feel that I've received probably the best feedback I could receive. A lot of people think they like my work, they enjoy, they learn a lot in the comments, during our live stream chats and so forth. But this comes from, the person, the designer of the Russian world concept. Okay, he, what I said in an interview intimidated him so much that he had a very emotional outbreak, calling me a traitor, my information lies, and so forth. This is probably the best feedback. Certainly, I am very intimidated in terms of my personal safety. Whoever is listening to me right now, know that I'm trying to stay away from windows as far as possible. There's no way I can accidentally fall out of the window. I'm afraid of heights these days. Okay, I am a family man. I'm a Christian, and I enjoy my life very much so. So something happens to me, you know where to look. So that is very concerning on a personal level. Will it affect my broadcasting, my stand, my mission? No. I am. I keep on going the way I've been going for all this time. and I will continue telling the truth. I will continue monitoring and documenting Russia's demise. I will continue putting everything online. I will continue giving people the facts about Russia. And it's very easy to fact check me and to double check to see if what I say is a lie or truth. And I dare anyone questioning me to do so. So, very scary, very intimidating on a personal level, but it will not affect um, my mission, my stand, my
And that
position, you know.
That's good to hear. And you've been doing this for 4 years. I mean, it's not that this is the first time you've taken on extraordinary risk. I think when you first picked up a microphone and started talking in this way and, examining these myths, lies, propagandistic tropes, I mean, you're already taking a risk right from the very first video. Um,
Jonathan, I collect scary moments now. The first scary moment was probably as scary as this Dugin's moment was when I caught the KGB operatives following me in real life in Tashkent. That was scary. It's happened 4 times since then. The first one was the scariest. And now Dugin making comments and reposting my interview on his page, on his Twitter X page, was equally as scary. So
He's inviting his
uh,
followers to troll you and to obviously, put psychological pressure on that. That's clearly the intent behind that. But of course, he must have watched the video and he's thought about it and thought about how he counters your points. Not very well, I have to say, but he's the fact that he spent some mental energy on it is concerning. And then we have this other concerning story, the one that's sort of blown up in the media. I think there's several angles we're going to cover it on. This is the highly dubious so-called peace process, which I suspect there's a few things behind this. But my first thought I'm going to throw out here is that if you look at the propagandistic messages or the useful idiots or the voices aligned with the Kremlin or those writing on RT on their behalf, and of course, in the magosphere, or those the Russian aligned part of the magosphere, and there seems to be actually fewer of them rather than more of them, because actually that sort of anti-Ukraine magosphere is much more concerned with Epstein now, and they're starting to actually dump Trump, as it were. So that's a more complex picture. But the picture that propagandists try to build up is that America is extraordinarily powerful and it can snap its fingers and everybody has to fall in line, including Ukraine. That's the overall tone. And you get the same from the Russian propaganda, although there's a slight angle here, which is that Russian victory is inevitable. It's always been inevitable. So any resistance to it, of course, is irrational, illogical, a waste of money, etc. It's trying to build up this picture of inevitability. And of course, that's far from true. Whereas if you dig beneath it, it seems to me that what you've got is this extremely coercive so-called peace process, but actually the pincer movement that's causing it, the US and Putin's Russia, they're actually in an incredibly weak position, and their aggression is greater because they're weak. You've got a sociopath on the one hand, which is Trump, and a psychopath on the other, and they're starting to worry for their own power and position. That maybe explains why we've got this intensity suddenly happening now. I don't know if you necessarily agree with part or all of that.
I agree with that. And this is my take. Now, we've been doing these conversations for over 3 years now, and they're regular. And you are the witness that I have always stood my ground on this idea that the victory for Ukraine will come not from the front lines, but from inside Russia, from regime imploding and collapsing. Because the war and the regime and the economy under the regime, it's just, they're not sustainable. And this is finally starts happening. You know, I've been talking a lot about the economic tsunami, the troubles in Russian economy. Well, everything I've talked about has materialized now. Came fall 2025, and now we are almost in winter, and then we're seeing an incredibly dark picture. in Russia. And the troubles are brewing inside for the front lines. Russian oil dropped to $36 per barrel. This is it. This is the death sentence. And it's not sometimes in the future. It's not around the corner. This is now.
And is this below profit margin, do
$36.
you think? Do we know what their profit margin is, or do we have to estimate that?
I have researched. I did a report on that last Wednesday at my weekly economic review on Inside Russia channel. And it's really hard to say because there is no official data. Okay, but most experts agree that, to the best of their knowledge, that full cycle production, not just extraction, but maintaining existing oil fields, getting the water to pump into the wells, maintaining the future recognizance for oil, paying the government because this oil is very taxed, highly taxed in Russia. So this full cycle production is around 35, 36, perhaps even higher, a little higher, $35, $36. So we are right there, not making much, even if it's a tad bit lower than $35, still compare that price to, 70, 80, 90 that Russia was selling oil in 2022, and even higher prices. This is nothing. Russian economy is not sustainable because the only, one major income source is fossil fuels and mineral resources exports, and that's collapsed. And fossil fuels used to be half of all federal budget. So the time has come for Putin. Something needs to be done. Now, there are different pathways. One pathway is to close down Russia, shut it down completely, order everyone to stay inside, so to speak, and start ruling with the iron fist like Russia has not seen before. Okay. Another way is to somehow stop the war and start paying attention to the domestic issues. Now, that's shaky ground, but that's more doable than the first path I told you. And then as soon as that time comes, the time of complete demise and soon demise, Vladimir Putin gets up and starts saying, oh, you know what, let's negotiate peace. Now I'm for real. That back in Alaska, it's just a show, wasn't peace summit. February, March, April, May, forget about that. Now is the time. Now I'm ready. Now I'm ready to make concessions. Now I'm ready to negotiate and make deals and move things. The same thing is happening in America. Trump enjoyed support of his voters for so many months, and now his support is vanishing. The Epstein papers has hit the ground off his feet, definitely. Then there are political fights within the Republican Party. We're seeing them right now. Okay. Then we're seeing that the support is diminishing and the future doesn't look very bright. I'm not an expert on American politics. Okay. But from what I understand as just a spectator, I see that the tide is changing. Okay. And the Republican Party is very, very concerned about the upcoming elections. And so something's got to be done. Something's going to be done for the political leadership in America, and something's going to be done for the political leadership in Russia. And coincidentally, we are seeing this situation of yesterday was like, okay, business as usual. And today it's like, no, the peace deal got to be done in 3 days. Or we're going to crush Ukraine, we're going to pull all the support. No negotiable. They were negotiating for 9 months before. Now, all of a sudden, it's not negotiable. So it means it shows me that someone really needs to stop the war. And then, Russia certainly is not going to stop it on not on not on Putin's conditions. Basically, they want on Putin's terms.
I mean, we know
And
these
then,
things take months and months and months. Even if, let's say, there was a ceasefire, and actually, Putin has ruled that out, an unconditional ceasefire is ruled out. It takes months to negotiate the various clauses in such a complex agreement. And the first draft, I think, even those who are seriously debating it will say that it is not drafted in the requisite detail or diplomatic language that would be required for an agreement. That's just even ignoring the idea that one, Putin's going to demand a hell of a lot more, because that's his style, and that's the traditional style of, let's say, first, Soviet and now Russian negotiations. They always demand far more than you expect to receive. And you and I have talked about the idea that Putin may start to realize that he possibly needs peace, but he also realizes that's an incredibly dangerous point for his regime. And he's probably going to dither for many, many months before he actually really decides, okay, well, I really need peace now because the risk of peace is lower than the risk of continuing war. At this point, I think the risk of him continuing the war is actually lower than him making peace, with the implication that he is weak and partly humiliated.
I agree on these points as well. Now, one step back, I want you to notice one thing. Now, um, let's look at the situation between these negotiations that are, well, quasi negotiations that are happening. That's not, it's bullying. It's not negotiations. It's forcing Ukraine into surrender, basically, right?
It's sign
Now,
here, it's not
right, sign here right now. You don't have time. Okay, I come from business. Okay, I business environment. I know how people push and demand and blackmail, and so that's how it looks like. But now, Putin needs peace or ceasefire on his terms, and his terms we know what they are: land, NATO non-involvement of NATO, reduction of Ukrainian army, and so forth. They've been saying that for quite some time. So I don't think he will. He will. I think he will stand his ground. Okay, he will not give up, or at least he won't give up anything major. Now, in America, all they need is the signature. No matter what kind of a peace agreement, Ukraine losing sovereignty or Ukraine staying sovereign, I don't think on that side of the pond they care at this point. Okay, they just need the fact. Okay, we stopped the war. I stopped the war. They signed. I am the peacemaker. I brought the parties together. And what they signed, who cares? It's their business. They agreed on that. Okay, so um, they both parties, the USA and Russia, are going towards their goals. It's just the goals are different. Okay, that goal in North America, they just they don't they don't understand Ukraine. They don't care much about Ukraine. Okay, and somehow it's coincidental that these two big countries, they have the same goal or the same goals all of a sudden, and they trying to achieve their goals. Okay, and they coincide because before the situation was so much different. America had different goal. It always backed Ukraine. It supplied weapons. It said, okay, we need Ukraine that is free, sovereign, and so forth. Now the tide has changed, and that just gives a lot of food for thought, don't you think?
Yes, absolutely. And as I say, I don't think there's any moral concerns here. There's no political concerns. I also think, we were talking before we recorded, Ukrainians have expressed throughout this war, and it's been encapsulated in some of Zelensky's speeches, because I don't think Zelensky's speeches are just, a reflection of a great orator and statesman, which I do think he is, despite the current, scandals and issues. He is still a towering figure and a brave figure on the world stage. But his words reflect and encapsulate what Ukrainians talk about, how they feel and how they act. And that is without heat, without light, even without food, we would prefer these than a state of slavery and dependence. And I think this is not understood, and they don't care to understand it, either in Washington, in Trump's circle, inner circle, the pro-Russia circle, let's call them, because there was rather a sort of more pro-Ukraine, but they've now been ousted. Kellogg is being pushed out, etc. And they absolutely don't care to understand this in Moscow. So you've got the sociopath and the psychopath thinking that. Ukraine is going to behave in a way that they think they have power and control over. What they don't understand is Ukraine will choose the opposite. They'll choose to be free, even if that means incredibly high costs that need to be paid. But what also Ukrainians understand is, despite all the issues, the corruption, the division, and let's face it, the lack of human resources, say in the infantry, which is causing issues. They also know that they've made incredible strides with technology. They know Russia is incredibly weak and running out of people. They know that drones the drone saturation means it's very difficult to advance any territory. So Russia is not likely to take huge chunks of territory. It could take months or even years to retake just Donbass and a few of those oblasts, which Putin claims. This is the kind of reality, and I think it's a reality that neither Washington nor Putin in Moscow want to acknowledge, because it goes counter their narrative, counter their interest. And as you say, it's not on their timescale. Their timescale is they need something now to save them.
Absolutely right. Not much I can add to that. I think you're right, Jonathan. I think you're absolutely right. You just one thing I might disagree. They both on both sides, in Moscow and in Washington, they might know that about Ukrainians. They might know how free-loving they are, how resilient they are, how courageous they are. It's just one or both parties, they just might not care about that whatsoever
No, I don't
because
think
they
they
have
care.
different
Yeah,
political agendas.
yeah.
The Kremlin has its agenda, and the Washington, what it seems now, has a very different agenda. Okay. Used to be a guarantor of peace and stability, political status quo in the world, and now I'm, I don't even know how to comment that. What they doing is I don't know how to say that.
There
Very
are
odd, very
Americans who are,
very
yeah,
odd.
it is odd. I mean, there are Americans who are freedom loving and peace loving, and there are many who are supporting Ukraine who are close
No,
friends of
I'm talking
mine.
about
But
the political
but the
leadership. I'm
political
not talking
sphere,
about the
absolutely,
American
of
people.
course, of course. I think the government is out of whack with its people, but also the people voted someone in who is deconstructing, as you say, the values that they've created since the Second World War that have led to extraordinary advances in wealth, longevity around the world. That's now being dismantled, that system of rule of law, which led to, I would argue, tremendous human progress, despite, the various issues. Overall, it's been incredibly beneficial. It's being deconstructed brick by brick. Now, if this was happening as it was happening under Yanukovych, who was hollowing out, the administration and the army, replacing various people or placing, Moscow's agents right throughout the infrastructure in Ukraine. This is a kind of Yanukovization, as it were, of the US. It's happening in plain sight. Or you could say, like Georgia Dream, or like Lukashenko, or even like Orban in Hungary. It's a set of it's a toolkit for deconstructing rule of law, and we can see it sort of playing out in real time. I mean, I'm going to throw over a sort of a slightly scary thought here, was that if Ukraine is forced into, or if some ceasefire does actually happen, this becomes an extremely dangerous point. This isn't the point where, suddenly peace breaks out, and defense and security suddenly, we all breathe a sigh of relief, we all go home. No, it seems to me that that's a massively dangerous point, because then Putin starts to rebuild his resources and he turns his fire on Europe, on destabilizing and deconstructing rule of law and institutions in Europe. That seems to me one of his bigger goals beyond Ukraine.
Well, first of all, he has told everyone that he plans to live until 150 years old. Okay, so he has a very long life ahead of him. Well, that's what he thinks. And obviously, he's the ruler of Russia. He's going to rule for many, many more years. It's really hard to disagree with you. If it's not peace and Ukraine, like real peace, and Ukraine is forced into this deal to surrender, we are in a very scary situation, very difficult situation because um, Russia is extremely weak economically right now. Its military is in chaos. But there was one example when Russia rebuilt itself. And I would like remind everyone what happened in 1941 when the Nazi Germany invaded Soviet Union. The USSR was not ready. It lost so much territory very quickly, and Nazi troops came close to the Kremlin, to Khimki, which is part of Moscow right now. Was it like 30 kilometers from the Kremlin? Stalin evacuated from Moscow to deep into the Ural Mountains, and the entire country was preparing to lose Moscow. Okay, a Russian army was incapable of stopping the Germans at that time, and there were a lot of lives thrown. Exactly the same situation is being repeated right now. All the USSR had was people, and people showed incredible acts of courage because they were defending their homeland. They were sacrificing their lives. That was a real courageous, but incredible situation. And then they stopped the Germans. In 1942, 43, and 44, Russian army rebuilt itself. It got experience, it got new tech, it got lots more people, um, got skills. Those young officers and soldiers, they got seasoned over the years. In Russia, there's a saying, "Понюхать пороху." So that's sniffed the gunpowder. So
Sniff
they
the
sniffed a
gunpowder,
lot
yeah.
of the gunpowder. And by 1945, Russian army, Soviet army was the strongest one in the world. Same happened to the Russian, can say economy, because Soviet, it was a very odd economic model at the time. It was mobilized war economy, but by 1945, it was in full speed. Rebuild factories, new factories, producing lots of very advanced tech, lots of armor, lots of planes. There's a chance that the history will repeat itself. There is a chance that if Putin is given a break, if he can breathe and catch breath, then he will start rebuilding both economy, which is not an impossible task. Okay, it's a very difficult task, but it is possible. I mean, look at North Korea, look at Turkmenistan, look at these countries.
Yeah.
Um,
This is what people
they
don't realize,
exist.
Konstantin. I don't think they realize that he has turned Russia back to more of a Soviet command model, but it has some small elements of capitalism left or a market economy, but essentially he's turned it into a directed economy. And unfortunately, if the aims are very simple, as you say, focusing on churning out armaments, etc., you can get quite a lot done under that kind of centrally command economy. And also, he's gone through the phase of looting. He's gone through the phase of having, all his sycophants and parasites filling their pockets. At this point, he can use the war to say, well, that model's done. Now we're returning to a Stalinist model, and you will do what you're told, and you will not steal to the same extent.
Now we're stepping on the ground where I can tell you lots of things about. That's my favorite topic to talk about, Russian economy, well, economy in general. And here I can tell you that there are possibilities. Oh boy, those people in Russian government, they are smart, heartless, ruthless, loveless, but smart, brilliant. They can change things around. Look, Russia is at the better situation than the USSR was, because the USSR was one huge, clumsy, hard to control economic machine, planned 100%. Russia is not planned. Now, large corporations, military industrial service complex is definitely 100% planned by the state, owned by the state. But also, there's a facade of free economy, free market economy, and there are laws that allow people to do business, to earn money, to create product, to create value. That's hugely important, because take that out of the equation right now. Close all small companies and say, hey, people, you can't do business any longer. You know what happens? Shortages of food, shortages of electronics, shortages of everything, shortages of services. Okay. Putin is using this, it's like a hybrid model right now, state and free market economy. Okay. The free market economy model has shrunk, the part has shrunk a great deal, but it's still there. And it makes Russian economy resilient. It makes people buy bread at the store without having to wait in long queues. It allows people to buy foreign-made, I don't know, TV sets and other things, washing machines. There is no shortages of anything in terms of consumer electronics, not like in the USSR. And he can keep the same model, but only upgrade it a little bit, okay? Make it more controllable, but still leave some space for individual interpreters. No, businessmen.
Entrepreneurs,
Sorry,
that's it.
my English is far from perfect, but businessmen, people willing to make living, okay, instead of state-owned companies who are always behind schedule and operate so ineffectively, building apartment blocks. You have these private companies, okay, and things like that. So that's where Putin can excel in the future if he starts building this model. There is a problem of all those soldiers who have been fighting in Ukraine for the past years coming back, but they might be a place for them in that new system too. Okay, um, Russian. There are plenty of Russian engineers who are still in Russia who haven't left, and you can, at snap of your finger, close Russia down. At least for the engineers, for computer programmers, you can still keep the facade of a free country and people can leave at any time. But if you are of interest for the state, they can make it, let's say, to make you leave in the country more difficult, that type of thing. And of course, there are plenty of ways to put people to prisons. Remember Sharashki? I don't know if you heard that word.
I've heard that
That's
word. I've heard that word. You have to.
engineers. The engineers, Russian engineers, were arrested en masse in early 40s and put into prisons. Instead, they weren't serving. They were serving prison time designing weapons. So they organized labs and design centers in prisons. And it's like the all engineers inside prisons, they had work and they worked for free for food basically. Okay, and they designed lots of tanks, guns, planes, and all kinds of stuff. Okay,
Very effective stuff
hey,
as well. Some very
very
effective
effective. Yeah,
kit. Yeah.
in 1945 it was number one. It was surpassing Germans, German tech. And that was you can take this model and reuse it in Russia in the future. So
And even in the
you
60s, even the space program, people were not working for, huge salaries, and they had to live in the so-called closed cities, which foreigners, you couldn't book an in-tourist trip to a whole range of closed cities, including Murmansk and many other strategic places. And you say they
yes.
had basically, like Akadem Garadok, you had little academic towns, which, let's face it, in facilities are probably little better than probably a prison in Norway is far more comfortable than some of these towns were.
Let's put it this way. They had more food available to them. That was
Yes,
the big thing.
that's the perk.
Снабжение.
Yes,
They
yeah.
had different kinds of снабжение, the supplying of those closed cities. Arzamas 16, and the other ones.
If
But anyway,
a
you brought
Biryovska
up
shop, that's what they're called, isn't it? You'd have a little hard currency shop where you can get you know,
that. No, that
that's
was for those diplomats, sailors, truckers who actually traveled abroad and got paid in hard currency. They came back and they could spend hard currency inside these Berezka shops. But those who were living inside those closed cities, they could go to a store and enjoy a few kinds of sausages, few brands of sausages, few brands of cheese, and it was always available. You didn't have to stand in
yeah.
line for that. That was the catch. Okay, so
That was it. That was it. And
but
I had a little taste of that, which I remember with some amusement. In 1992, first time in MGO, and I was there for about 6 weeks. For the first 4 weeks, I went to the basic Stolovka, which is the sort of student one, and I ate, what is it? They had already a little private kiosk where you could buy some, it was like mincemeat in a sort of pastry shell. That was nice, but generally it was kotletki and kasha. It was just little meatballs and buckwheat, and that was kind of it. And that's what I lived on for 4 weeks. And then someone said, "Oh, but you are allowed in the." You as foreign students, you are actually allowed in the other cafeteria where the, aspirantura, the PhDs and the lecturers go. And of course, we arrived there, and there's a same prices, but a fantastic array of food.
Jonathan, you're not gonna believe it, but I experienced the very same situation just a few days ago. I traveled to Turkmenistan, and they had the same system. They treated us to as foreigners to all kinds of good food, and if you're not a foreigner and just go to regular places, you find a completely different situation, different picture there. Okay, so I know exactly. I remember from the old times, and I just got a taste of it just a week ago. I returned from Turkmenistan. So,
Extraordinary trip. Well, I can't
yes,
wait to hear about that on your channel. I know you're
yes,
going to put more
yes,
details about that on
yes, I
on
will.
there. Well,
So,
there's yeah.
I just want to say one thing. This is unique. I have not heard of anyone talking about what we have just talked about. If Putin gets a break, he might revive Russia militarily. Okay, and this is a very scary possibility. Okay, and it's a very dangerous situation for the future. So I haven't heard of anyone talking about that. Us, I think that's the first time
I
anyone on
think
the
yeah.
internet
Yeah, I think
speaks.
I think it probably is.
So
I think it's a very strong possibility because how is he going to hold the country together? How is he going to give it purpose? And there was one. It was Elvira Barry I was speaking to, and I'm not sure whether she said it on the record or not, so I'm gonna be careful there. And she said at the start of the SVO, or the special military operation, as it's called, she spoke to some friends who were liberals who were opposed to Putin, opposed to this, opposed to that. And she said, "How do you feel? How do you feel?" They were still in the country, and she was obviously been out of it for a long time. She said, "How do you feel? This is a terrible thing. How do you feel?" And they said, "Well, we feel a sense of relief." And she was stunned. What do you mean relief? They said, "Well, we don't agree with the war necessarily, but we know where the country's going, and there's a purpose now. There's something to do." I thought that was a terrifying thought.
yeah, that's a terrifying thought. uh, I don't know what to tell you.
I don't know what to say about that one. It is that rarely am I shocked. I've been shocked at your Dugin, and I was shocked at that story. It's especially from someone. Elvira tends to not embellish stories. She tends to say things as they are and as she experiences them, which is like you. It's incredibly welcome to have that. There was another topic I wanted to cover, and this is sort of it's not really light-hearted because it's a horrible person, but it seems that a Z Patriot Civil War has broken out. Solovyov is having meltdowns, screaming at his staff, threatening other people. He being threatened in turn by other people in the Z Patriot community. This seems to me, as you've always described it, the sort of bulldogs fighting under the rug. But is there something specific going on here with Solovyov? Is he going down, as it were, in the system? Is he losing some of his position, like we saw Lavrov? I mean, we haven't even talked about Lavrov and Gerasimov, who seem to be kind of being moved on the way out. Is this a reshaping of the system for the next phase of war, or is this the sort of internal civil war that we've been talking about for some time?
There's analogy. If in the past I spoke of the bulldogs fighting under the rug, and we couldn't see who the bulldogs were, but we saw them fighting. Now they're fighting on top of the rug. We see who they are. We see what they're doing. And yes, the civil war has broke out. It's out there in the open, and it's pretty violent. There are victims. Two Z Patriots, very big figures in Z Patriot community, have been labeled as foreign agents. Okay. I think that the explanation is fairly simple. It's all about the money. You see, people are in propaganda for one thing, for money, because most of them are intelligent. They know exactly what's going on. They know the reasons for the war in Ukraine. They know the beneficiaries, who the beneficiaries are. And they know the roles of each player inside this system, the vertical of power, the propaganda. And those roles pay. Why else would you join Russian propaganda and sell your soul? For pretty penny, well, for pretty ruble. And what we've been seeing is the disappointment of Russians with the state, with the war, and with their situation. I made a live stream. I researched. And I was very surprised to know, to learn, to discover that a lot of Russians are angry because their informational bubbles they have been living in for 3 years burst. And now it wasn't an issue to Russian people, but that's the circumstances, the fallen economy, the rising prices, the new taxes, the state taking more of their sons, husbands, fathers, poked through the bubbles and they burst. Okay. And you cannot ignore the situation any longer. Surprise, surprise, you get outside of your apartment and it's out there in every corner. Prices, living standard, fallen living standard, utilities failing, drones flying, air raid alerts and all of that. And they're angry. And they've started donating much less. And that's a huge, again, market, well, a source of income for Z Patriots. Okay. That's just a personal story. A person I know in south of Russia, in one of the smaller towns, was approached and asked to do fundraising. And the fundraising was one lady was asking to get money to buy bulletproof vest and some food for her son in the front lines and some clothing, boots, and things like that. Very basic stuff that must be provided by the state, but it obviously is not. So the amount they were raising was It's like $700 or something like that. And so the lady, that's, thank God it's no one in my circle, but I just know this personal story personally. So she started reaching out to her friends, colleagues, people she worked with, and smaller towns, a lot of people know each other, right? So the word got out that she was doing a fundraiser, and she was immediately approached by the professional fundraisers. As it turned out, there were two groups of people operating in just that town who were fundraising on a constant basis. Okay. And they were very surprised that that woman started doing the fundraising. They started threatening her, saying, "This is not your business. This is not your market. Stop right now, or or we do things, and we warn you, don't ever look into doing fundraising again." And she got scared. Just to let you know that there are scamming schemes are going at all kinds of levels. At the very bottom level, in schools, people, well, it's kids are forced to make candles for the front line. You've seen the reports, and they make masking nets, and then the parents donate money. No one checks where all of that, especially money, goes to and how it's spent. And imagine Solovyov having an incredible resource of accessing millions, tens of millions of Russian people. Okay, and he's been constantly fundraising. That's a unprofessional level. And then all Z Patriots who have Telegram channels, it's just all you have to do is to subscribe to any of them or just look at them, and you'll see constant fundraisers. So all of a sudden, on one hand, we have this people getting the money and keeping the money, or most of the money. On the other hand, less and less donations given. Okay, so this market is shrinking. The pie is becoming smaller, and then they start fighting for the pieces of that pie. Okay,
Attacking each
so
other, creating more
attacking.
noise, and yeah, and their calls for more viciousness against the country's enemies, of course, get dialed up as well because that's the way to, they think, I guess, get more donations back in.
I think that's the main reason for this civil war. And this is the start, and it's gonna grow. It's like a small fire, it catches up and expands, and then it becomes raging inferno. Okay, and I think this is what is happening right now. We start seeing the beginning of the permanent civil war between Z people, and then I think that right now it's just the groups fighting, and then the KGB will get involved, the politicians will get involved one way or another, because everyone will be fighting for money, using money to get more resources, political resources, military resources, law enforcement, and so forth. Alekhin, this big figure, he fell victim of this war. First victim, well, not one of the first victims. There's a big story. He was caught. He was being taped as he's discussed how to steal. Yeah, $2 million worth of donations, 200 million rubles, more than $2 million worth of donations, how to launder them. Okay. And then he was being filmed covertly. And then he was basically, his punishment, he's not charged with anything, but he is labeled as foreign agent, and he cannot do any fundraising activity any longer. That's illegal. I think they also call them extremist or something like that. But anyway, his biggest punishment is he can't do fundraisers anymore.
And of course, people should understand that stealing is not a crime, but actually stealing more than you're allowed to, stealing more than you're allotted, that is a crime against the regime.
Well, that's the reward that the regime gives you. You have your duties, You have to obey the orders without asking any questions. And in return, you can use the powers that they give you, and the powers can be different. Z people, they have access to a lot of people, so they have informational power. You know, the state prosecutors have power to open close criminal cases. The KGB people have power to either steal business or protect from others who want to steal it. And the politicians have power of money flow, taxpayers' money flows to the provinces and the expenditures and so forth. So that's the reward they get, and then they use it to enrich themselves. You know, that's very, very, very simple to understand about Russian vertical of power and Russian regime.
Absolutely, it's one of the
So many
core
people
ideas.
don't
Yeah.
don't understand that. Yeah, it's amazing.
It is. It's the extraordinary idea, and it's one you can trace back several hundred years via a concept called Karmlenia, all the way back to the foundations of the state and Ivan the Terrible. It's an
Absolutely,
interesting thread to follow. It's something I'd
absolutely.
like to learn much more about because I
Oprichnina, that's where the roots of the
appreciate yeah.
system are.
That's it. One of my favorite dark books, of course, is Dina Prichnika by Sorokin, which, if anyone wants a really dark read, but also an insight into that, that's quite a good one to have a look at.
Just a quick fact, not too many people know, and I was very surprised to learn. One of members of Tashkent Breakfast Club, the community of Russian Ukrainian exiles, one of them is former MGU, his history professor, very, very solid scientist. He studied history, I guess. Well, he gave us a couple lectures on the origins of the system, and Oprichnina, that was the KGB of Ivan Grozny, Ivan the Terrible, right? And then the Oprichnina it got so strong that it was becoming a threat. And then it disappeared. He went after Oprichnina, and then those Oprichniki, they've disappeared. But they actually did not disappear. They didn't vanish into thin air. They became Russia's noble class. All the counts and the nobility, they are originally Oprichnina working for Ivan the Terrible. Did you
Yes.
know that?
I didn't, but it makes a lot of sense. I mean,
Yes, it does.
there's a similar process actually that happens in the Middle Ages. You could be a fairly bloodthirsty, ruthless warrior committing all sorts of horrific kind of acts, and then in your latter years or through the generations, you launder your reputation, you get given land, you build a manor house, you pay for a coat of arms, you launder the terrible acts you've committed into something, as you say, that and then you talk about nobility and the values of knighthood and so on. So I'm not saying that all noble families came through that way, but there are many, many cases, and you go back here in Britain to the knights of the Norman conquest and the horrific crimes they would have committed, but then they're able to sort of launder their reputation. So it's entirely believable. It's entirely unfortunately, it's not just confined to Russia, but here you're talking about an entire class, going from that background into the other. But it's unfortunately a feature, let's say, of power dynamics from the Middle Ages onwards. But that's a topic for another time. But also, what we see is an extraordinary continuity between those who had power, status, and influence in the late Soviet period and those who are still at the center of power. Again, that is unique throughout Eastern Europe and even in Ukraine, a far, far lower percentage of the nomenclatura of influential people, and including KGB, etc., actually retained their position in society. In some countries, it went down to single digits and almost wiped them out. In Russia, it's been estimated it's somewhere around 60% of those who could be considered at the top of their various industries and professions can trace back that they had, status and position in the late Soviet period. So unfortunately, that kind of transition or inheritance of power and status is one of the reasons why we're at where we're at, because they were not lustrated, they were not cleaned out, and the system wasn't tackled.
Well, but can't argue with you here.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the discussion that if Putin is given a break, if he puts everything on pause, then nothing good will happen for Russia in the first place. And of course, there will be other countries will be threatened. The Western civilization will be threatened, I think. But nothing good will happen for Russians. Okay, they will be used as a resource. And then what you said is very important. The thing is, in order for Russia to shine, to be rebuilt, it needs to get rid of this inheritance, Soviet inheritance, perhaps even imperial inheritance. That wasn't done in the 90s, and it should have been done. The politician, very famous politician, Politkovskaya, that was her goal, her mission, to lustrate those who committed crimes against Soviet people. Nomenclatura, the KGB, well, she was murdered. Okay. Um, Without lustration, without complete reset of the system, without Russians repenting, without taking responsibility, there will be no safe, loving, respecting Russia in the future. So that's a must. Everyone who has committed crimes must be investigated, charged, punished, must serve the sentence, must pay the price. And that's the only way. Very few people talk about that these days, but I think it's important.
100%. We are completely aligned on that as an absolute fundamental, and safeguarding civilization and moving forward to the benefit of Russians and all of Russia's neighbors. Completely agree with that. That's probably where we're going to have to end it. In fact, I think it's a very appropriate place to end the conversation. Extraordinary, powerful idea and a very true one as well. Konstantin, stay safe. Good luck. Thank you for everything you're doing and your perseverance. It's massively appreciated, and I think people will get as much out of this conversation as I have.
Jonathan, thank you very much for inviting. It's a pleasure. Always pleasure to have these conversations. Very intellectually pleasing. So thank you. Until the next time.
Бажаємо міцного здоров'я. Ми, бійці батальйону безпілотних систем Black Raven 93-ї бригади Холодний Яр, виконуємо бойове завдання на Константинівському напрямку в Донецькій області. Для їх успішного виконання наш підрозділ має потребу в пікапах для виїзду особового складу на позиції, евакуації, своєчасного підвозу боєприпасів, дронів та обладнання в район ведення бойових дій. Звертаємося до YouTube-спільноти Silicon Curtain та Джонатана особисто з проханням допомогти підтримати збір, а також до Car for Ukraine та Бандера Мобіль з проханням допомогти з купівлею, підготовкою та доставкою авто на фронт. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!